Welcome back, everyone. I've been extraordinarily busy this last week, so pardon the lack of updates. Releasing a game on Steam is a lot of work. Actually, just releasing any game is a lot of work, so I have a ton of respect for game devs. I'll never again complain if I clip through some geometry. Soar was supposed to be out yesterday, but it's actually out today. So for those of you who wishlisted, thank you so much, and the game should be ready to go. If JDS is not quite what you're into, that's totally fine, but if you do have any friends that are into rocket jumping and speedrunning, let them know about it. But now, let's get to the actual video. The recent release of Fortnite Chapter 4 using all of UE5.1's newest features, Lumen, Nanite, Virtual Shadow Maps, and TSR, or Temporal Super Resolution, has created quite a buzz about UE5. Since I've been developing in UE4 for a while now, starting with simple black to white scenes for input lag testing, the much more complicated Frog Pursuit and its derivative Smooth Frog, and now finally a proper game Soar, I've been closely following what Epic has been doing with UE5 as well. But I teased in the last video that I'm not using UE5 for Soar on purpose, and in this video I want to talk about why. We can start here actually in the UE5 editor, and I've got the Sludge Sanctum map loaded up. Converting the whole project to UE5 was relatively simple, and luckily, only a few things broke. Right now the game looks pretty much like it did in the DX11 UE4 version, but to enable Lumen, we can open up the level's post-processing volume, go to Global Illumination, and set the method to Lumen. Compile, and we're done. Soar with proper global illumination looks fantastic. For performance reasons, the UE4 version of JDS uses a single main shadow casting light, the sun, with a smattering of non-shadow casting lights to mimic the light bounce you'd get from real GI, or to fill in the subtle orange glow coming from the sludge. But without some sort of global illumination, the scene looks pretty flat. I've done my best to spruce it up with varying geometry and material color, but any areas that aren't directly lit from either the sun or one of my fill lights all have the same intensity. Spaces that should be dark, like underneath the second tier here, aren't, which hurts the sense of depth we would get if the scene were lit naturally. That same area is now realistically dark, and the sunlight hitting the floor beneath is subtly illuminating the ceiling. The emissive sludge material is even giving a nice orange glow around the pools and the pipes. In the background, emissive green light from the speed lasers gives a nice flare that's missing from the UE4 build. And while the shadow beneath the tutorial guy is nice and sharp, shadows cast from the rock geometry way above us have diffused nicely, which makes physical sense given how large the sun disk is. You can see it more clearly here. The shadow is super crisp right at the edge of the geometry, but the penumbra extends as the shadow gets further away from the edge. This really grounds every bit of geometry in the scene. There are no shadows that don't quite meet their casters, so we don't get that detached, floating geometry feel. In the previous scenes, Lumen didn't change the overall timbre of the visuals, just enhanced it. But there are some cases where global illumination alone can dramatically change the intended look of a room. At the end of the strafe jump hall, I meant for this room to be lit only by the bounce light coming through the oculus, and I faked it with a pretty strong non-shadowed point light. With Lumen though, the room looks very different. The speed lasers, both in front and behind the camera, tint the whole room green, and the sludge is now casting an evil red glow on the rock formations coming through the window. The GI coming from the sunlight isn't as strong as I'd expect, and even turning all of Lumen's dials and switches to goose the bounce light contribution can't quite get the scene to look the way I want, so I had to resort to putting the fake point light back in. Lumen isn't a replacement for artists, not that I'm claiming to be an artist. Interior scenes in Soar without any direct sunlight probably benefit the most from Lumen, or any global illumination. For performance reasons, most interior scenes in JDS don't have any shadow casting lights at all, leading to the scenes looking fairly flat. In this section of the map, there are only 4 lights. The blue light to draw your attention to the teleporter, the light from the adjacent room, which is bleeding through the wall geometry, a fill light in the button cubby, and one last light to brighten up the ceiling. But let's take a look at the UE5 Lumen version. Oh, it's so much better. More dramatic, more depth, the teleporter pops more. With Lumen, you can also control the amount of ambient light with its skylight leak setting, and that's where the ambient occlusion-like effect is coming from. You can turn on ambient occlusion in UE4, but it doesn't look nearly as good, and it's not as accurate as a GI solution. And since I'm trying to sell JDS as a fast-paced FPS, I can't justify the performance cost of AO. Here's another example where the AO-like effect from Lumen really transforms the scene. Outside of the obvious green glow from the lasers, check out the tutorial guy statue jutting from the rocks in the background. Lumen does a great job of giving definition and depth to the rocks, which you can now properly see are enveloping the tower. So, Lumen looks great. Mostly. but there are aspects of Lumen's visual presentation that make shipping a game with it problematic. The first is that Lumen's GI updates slowly. To show this off, I've gone back to this dark area beside the player start, and I've set up a light that blinks on and off every 2 seconds. With Lumen disabled, we can see that the light is instantly on and instantly off. But if I enable Lumen... Whoa. When the light flashes, bounce light propagates slowly through the scene like ripples in a pond. This is one of the first things I noticed when I converted the project to UE5. Rocket explosions, instead of being sharp and punchy, felt slow and languid. And because the sphere I use for the rocket explosion rapidly shrinks, we get these nested, onion-like, ghosted snapshots of the explosion. And worse, because the explosion light is so transient, anything that occludes the slowly decaying light, like for instance your gun barrel, instantly wipes the lighting information. In Lumen's defense, we do have the ability to adjust the update speed, and though it is an improvement, it's still pretty slow, and it actually makes another Lumen issue worse. Small, or relatively small, emissive surfaces are noisy. Check out the light cast on the floor by the timer lights along the raceways. It's like we're looking at some Christmas lights. That's not the look I was going for. And if we increase the update speed to make the rocket explosions look better, the Christmas light effect gets so much worse. Some of Lumen's faults could be masked partly or even entirely if a game's art, materials, static meshes, level design, that sort of thing, was built with Lumen's limitations in mind. With busier scenes, more geometric complexity, super detailed and contrasty textures, you might not even notice GI slowly fading in or a little emissive noise here or there. But the one thing that can't be masked is the performance. All the video I've shown of the UE5 version of Soar has been taken at full HD, that's 1920 by 1080, with my GTX 1070 Ti with the game running at only 77% resolution. That was almost enough to keep the game running at 60 FPS, but I'm sure you've seen plenty of frame drops. At 100% resolution, I'm in the mid-40s, occasionally hitting 50. UE5's TSR, or Temporal Super Resolution, does a pretty decent job of upsampling, but it's decidedly not better than native. TSR has trouble with the high contrast edges on the speed lasers, and because of the really low input resolution, geometry still has an aliased stair-step-like look and motion. It's not until we stop moving that TSR has enough information to resolve a good image. The sample and hold nature of most LCD screens works to hide a lot of temporal upscaling artifacts, so TSR and FSR and DLSS can get away with things that would never fly on a CRT, but sampling from a sub-full HD image just isn't providing enough information per frame to mask the inherent aliasing. My 1070 Ti is fairly old at this point, but compared with the top 10 GPUs on the Steam hardware survey, it sits roughly in the middle, performance-wise. Way better than a 1050, better than the ubiquitous 1060 and the 1650, slower than the 2060 and 3060 variants, which surprisingly combined make up 12.5% of all cards. But I can't sell a fast-paced first-person shooter that runs at 40 FPS to a market chock full of 1060s and 1650s. Maybe if our baseline were 3070 level performance? By the way, where are all the $250 used 3070s? UE5 and Lumen offer an interesting peek at what games may look like in several years, but I don't think the market now is ready for any major release. Sure, we may get things like Fortnite Chapter 4 or Portal RTX, but these seem to me to be a metaphorical spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down. The medicine being the car payment you just spent on a graphics card. I think the likeliest scenario is that players turn the features on, try them out, realize their frame rate is half or even less of what it was, and then turn them right back off. And that's why Soar, out now, is using UE4. If you like this type of game dev content, give the video a thumbs up. And if you've made it all the way to the end and you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing. 7,000 subs is not that far away, which is astonishing. Thank you so much for watching.